Don't trust Daily Mail website. Microsoft browser warns users. It's actually not the browser, but it appears that the new the service called NewsGuard, which I use, has been embraced by Microsoft. And there's some controversy around NewsGuard. Activists are angry, but I do like NewsGuard, and we're going to talk about why, and we're going to talk about this story because this is really important and it pertains to fake news. Microsoft's internet browser is warning users not to trust the Daily Mail's journalism as part of a feature designed to fight fake news. Visitors to Mail Online who use Microsoft Edge can now see a statement, asserting that this website generally fails to maintain basic standards of accuracy and accountability and has been forced to pay damages in numerous high-profile cases. The message, which is produced by a third-party startup called NewsGuard, tells readers to proceed carefully, given that the site regularly publishes content that has damaged reputations, caused widespread alarm, or constituted harassment or invasion of privacy. It gives Mail Online, one of the world's biggest news websites, 1 out of 5 on credibility, the same level as the Kremlin-backed RT News service. NewsGuard is run by news industry veterans and says it is trying to establish industry standard benchmarks for which news websites should be trusted. It employs analysts to manually check whether sites meet a series of journalistic standards, making all its judgments public and inviting outlets to respond to criticism and improve their standards to gain a higher rating. I want to stop right here, and I want to talk a little bit about NewsGuard. There's been a controversy where people, I don't know which sites, but there's some indie news sites that are saying that NewsGuard is a neoconservative, pro-military industrial complex, all of that stuff. I don't know about that. I've seen the stories, and I kind of just say, well, I don't know. They've got an image here. You can see NewsGuard. I use NewsGuard. NewsGuard rates The Guardian with a green check mark. Now, I've talked about this in the past, and this is seemingly controversial because a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservatives, a lot of anti-social justice people are upset because they've rated some things positive and some things negative. I actually disagree completely with NewsGuard on many sites. For instance, they give the Daily Beast a green check mark. I think that's absolutely incorrect because the Daily Beast regularly produces fake news. They really, really do. Now, regularly and how much, maybe that's the issue. The stories I'm seeing that I can point out errors may be only a small fraction of the Daily Beast, but that's not the point. The point is, they also say the Daily Caller is green checkmark. So if I've got to look at the Daily Beast, which I think is total garbage, but they're also saying the Daily Caller is good too, then I have to realize that I have my own biases to overcome. If they're going to say the Daily Mail is fake news, well, I don't necessarily trust them outright. It just gives me pause and tells me maybe I should dig a little deeper and make sure this is true. And lo and behold, there have been a few stories by the Daily Beast that were actually framed incorrectly. Okay, I'm sorry, the Daily Mail. So they said the Daily Mail is a red exclamation point, like this is regularly not good. They do tell you why they say that, and there's been several high-profile cases, so apparently that's the reason. I'm not here to shill for NewsGuard or anything like that. I'm just here to point out we all have our biases. We do. If the Daily Beast, I think, is garbage, but they think the Daily Caller is garbage, it doesn't mean they're right or I'm right. Obviously, I think I'm right. It just means, well, at least they're telling both of us to screw off. Like, you see the point I'm trying to make? There are people on the left who say the Daily Caller is a partisan propaganda rag, and they produce fake news and misconstrue arguments and things like that. Okay, I mostly disagree. I think some of the things they do have had errors. They've had retracted some stories, but hey, most people have. But I do think the Daily Caller tends to do better than the Daily Beast. If someone disagrees with me, how do we determine who gets to be right or wrong? The real issue is that it seems like NewsGuard is just kind of lax, right? That they're willing to give mainstream publications the benefit of the doubt, even if they do have bad stories. But let's read on. Until now, the service has only been available as a downloadable plugin, but this week Microsoft began installing it automatically on all mobile editions of its Edge browser, the successor to Internet Explorer, in the first stage of what its creators hope will be a widespread rollout across multiple platforms. Edge has a tiny proportion of the global internet browser market, and the NewsGuard plugin is only included on the version for mobile users, not desktop users. The partnership was signed as part of Microsoft's Defending Democracy program. The tech company has no oversight over NewsGuard's editorial verdicts. There's a lot of problems with NewsGuard. Let's talk about some criticisms. For one, they don't review every site. One of the big problems with fake news is that it's new blogs, small blogs, purposely writing fake garbage to manipulate. However, we do have a big problem with mainstream outlets that are well-funded that produce fake news and get away with it. Look at USA Today, The Washington Post, The New York Times, CBS, all of these stories that uncritically promoted the fake news of this weekend, they're all rated credible by NewsGuard, and that's a huge problem. And thus, NewsGuard, what I should be saying is, it's not that I think it's going to be like a perfect shield to protect you. It's a simple layer of defense to help and guide a little bit, but it's not perfect. These news organizations still get things wrong left and right, and it's still on all of us to try and make sure the news we're getting is legit, and that's the big problem. I can never expect individuals to do the groundwork I do. You see this chair? I sit in this chair for like 9 hours a day. I wake up, I'm on a treadmill, then I sit in this chair and I read nonstop. And when a story breaks, there's a reason why I didn't jump on the false narrative about these MAGA kids. It's because I researched. I can't expect everyone to do that. So I do think NewsGuard does a little bit to make sure, like, hey, if this is a site claiming this, you probably should avoid it. But I emailed the NewsGuard people and said, there's a concern. If you give a site that more often than not produces fake news a green rating, or you give a site that maybe 6 times out of 10 produces legitimate news, you're essentially providing cover for the high density of fake news they publish. So therein lies the problem. What I was told, and I haven't done like a legitimate interview, I was trying to set something up, so maybe I will, actually with Steve Brill, one of the co-founders, is they said they can't police everything. They just try to assign some kind of credibility rating to say, is it better or is it worse? You know, could you trust it more or less? And there's a big problem there in that it tends to be high-profile, well-funded, left-wing, New York-based outlets that produce a lot of fake news, but everyone just assumes it's true. So the issue is, if no one is fact-checking these stories, how can you determine if it's real or not? And thus, the point I'm trying to make right now with this rant is that NewsGuard isn't perfect. Far from it. It's not bad. That's it. It's just not bad. So I use it. I do. And the main reason is it's someone else's perspective on the outlets I'm reading, and so I use it as a tool to balance my own bias. I still trust myself more than I trust them, but I appreciate that I can have constantly someone challenging my own perceptions on what is or isn't acceptable. Let's read on. Steve Brill, a NewsGuard co-founder, said the Mail Online verdict had been reached in a transparent manner. We spell out fairly clearly in the label exactly how many times we've attempted to contact them. The analyst that wrote the write-up got someone on the phone who, as soon as he heard who she was and where she was calling from, hung up. We would love to hear if they have a complaint or if they've changed anything. He said NewsGuard took complete responsibility for the verdicts and all complaints should be directed at his company rather than Microsoft. They can blame us and we're happy to be blamed. Unlike the platforms, we're happy to be accountable. We want people to game our system. We are totally transparent. We are not an algorithm. NewsGuard's business model relies on licensing its product to tech companies which want to fight online disinformation but do not want to take responsibility for making editorial judgments. This is great. Great. Listen. If the far-left activists think even the Daily Caller is fake news, okay, but they say Daily Caller is legit, that's great. That means when it comes to Twitter, if Twitter wants to ban Alex Jones, yes, they've rated Alex Jones as fake news. You can't do anything about it, but they're not going to get rid of Daily Caller, and you know the far left would love to do that. This isn't going to protect everybody. It may actually be biased. But ultimately, a service like this that's willing to rate Daily Caller, Daily Wire, and other right-wing sources as legitimate is a shield for them against these massive Silicon Valley companies you know are far left. Jack Dorsey has done nothing to stop the death threats, but at least with this service, if they take down any of these other sources, conservative sources, you can say, hey, this is rated by an independent organization as legit, and that's why I'm willing to respect them. Does it mean everything they do is perfect? Of course not. But let's finish up the story. Brill said his company, which has received investment from the advertising group Publicis, has completed human-generated verdicts on the top 2,000 news outlets in the U.S. and was hiring staff to produce similar verdicts on the top 150 news sites in the UK, with the aim of publishing results in April. A spokesperson for Mail Online said, "We have only very, very recently become aware of the NewsGuard startup and are in discussions with them to have this egregiously erroneous classification resolved as soon as possible." But here's the best part. You can reach out to NewsGuard, and you can correct anything that they find is bad. One of the things that strikes credibility from an organization is their unwillingness to tell you who funds them, and their unwillingness to present a system for correction. And if NewsGuard is willing to engage with these platforms, that means they can all adhere to a basic set of standards that NewsGuard... I think this is fantastic. I really do. Look, if you're a right-wing source, and you think you're being rated as bad, then you can approach them and say, what falls in line with what you think is more appropriate, and it's actually fairly reasonable. I kid you not. If you go to NewsGuard, they have like 9 criteria, I think, and it's not that complicated to get a good rating. So again, it's not guaranteeing you're reading legit news. It's just trying to increase the amount of trust you can have for the platform you're on. Long story short, and the main point I want to make. For one, people have been addressing this to me. I've been getting a lot of emails about NewsGuard saying it's bad, it's corrupt, and things like that. Well, that may or may not be the case. Like, the point is, this is one of the better ideas, in my opinion, for helping fight fake news. It's not perfect. Nothing will ever be perfect. But again, I'll reiterate my point. When I saw that they were willing to give right-wing sources a green check mark and some left-wing sources a green check mark, and they also gave some left-wing sources a red exclamation point and some right-wing sources, I said, this is a challenge to my bias from independent sources that is valuable to me, because I don't want to be in an echo chamber, okay? So when I read the Daily Mail, I say, maybe I shouldn't trust them as much. And sure enough, I found that to be the case in some instances. But if I also think that some outlets are really, really bad and they challenge that perspective, I say, okay, then I better be careful to make sure I'm right. If they're saying this is more trustworthy and I don't trust them, I better double check myself, otherwise I could be wrong. Essentially, it's like the bias popping fairy. NewsGuard's biased, for sure. Everyone is, okay? But at least now I have an additional perspective on whether or not I'm being biased. You don't got to take my word for it. You don't got to like their service. I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm just saying it's good that I can challenge my own biases when I'm sitting here with my follower count and my news. There's someone else I can check to see if I may be not realizing what's actually happening. And there you go, plain and simple. I think it's cool that they're embedding it in a browser. I'll never use Microsoft Edge, so fat little good that'll do. But hey, there it is. But let me know what you think. I know a lot of people disagree, and feel free to comment below. And I'll see you tomorrow on the main channel at 4 p.m.